Good morning. I'm Darren Nelson of the YF&R Committee. It is my pleasure this morning to introduce Mr. Tim Hodges. He is our keynote speaker. Tim is a proud product of One Room School near the family farm in Southeast Nebraska and is the director of Gallup Education. He also leads research projects in leadership development, employment selection, employee engagement, and well-being. As a kid, Hodges was an active participant in the local 4-H club, and in his high school and college years he was active in FFA, including serving as a state vice president for the State of Nebraska FFA Association. He received a bachelor's degree in agribusiness, a master's degree in leadership education, a doctorate in business, and all from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Hodges also had been active in public service, having served multiple terms as commissioner on the Nebraska Coordinating Commission for Prosperity Post-Secondary Education and as a public board member for the nonprofit Center Advance CTE, and on the boards of the Gallup Federation Credit Union Christian Heritage. As an organization served at risk children and youth. He currently serves as an elder to Brookshire Church in Omaha and is a member of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Chancellor Alumni Advisory Council. Tim remains connected to his roots in Southeast Nebraska as a part of his family farm and livestock business. Hodges, his wife, and his 4 children live in Gretna, Nebraska. Please help me welcome Tim Hodges.
Thanks, Darren. It says I'm still involved in the family farm. My brother would contest that. What really happened was a few years ago, my wife and I bought 40 acres of farmland that my grandparents originally had, and I quickly rented it back to my dad. So I cash one check a year. I shower before work, not after work, unlike many of you. In fact, I was talking to my nephew over Christmas, and he just has no idea what I do at Gallup. So my 12-year-old says I take numbers and turn them into words so people can do stuff differently. That's a pretty good description of most of my job. I go to more school board members than people who are elected to be there, and travel around the country, speak at conferences, and work with school district clients of Gallup's. But my nephew just wasn't buying it, and he has no idea what that is. His dad, my brother's a pig farmer, and they have corn and soybeans in Southeast Nebraska. And so he says, what do you really mean, Uncle Tim? What do you really do? And I was trying to explain it to him. I said, the Gallup poll, we do interviews and stuff, and then we analyze the data, and he just wasn't buying it. And so he says, he says, Uncle Tim, I think I have it figured out now. I said, okay, let's hear it. Mr. He knows everything. If you're not sure, just ask him. And he says, so basically you and my dad have the same job. And I said, no, your dad's a pig farmer and I work at Gallup. And he goes, no, you both just move stuff from one pile to another all day long. He goes, the only difference is dad takes a shower after work, you take a shower before work, but everything else is about the same. And I said, well, there's probably more truth to that than I'd like to admit some days, and I know my brother can look behind him some days and notice he got something accomplished, and I'm not sure that's always true at the end of the day for me, but I'm really proud of my time in rural Nebraska. I've lived in Nebraska my whole life. As a state officer in FFA, I was a student at the University of Nebraska and then stayed on for graduate school and started working at Gallup in Lincoln, and then we built an office here in Omaha a few years later. So have been with Gallup now 18 years and love the work I get to do. But over the last couple of years, I've had several opportunities to speak to different Farm Bureau leadership groups, and anything that involves youth and agriculture and education really kind of fits my mission well. But I thought I'd start with a couple of pictures here. This is actually the school that I attended for kindergarten through 7th grade. It's a one-room school, Little House on the Prairie style. You all actually understand what this is about. Most audiences I speak to have no idea what I'm talking about, but it was a Class 1 school, so kindergarten through 8th grade, probably half the size of this room. That was the entire school district. Now I work with school districts that have 150,000 kids and 200 schools and this kind of thing. But it's interesting, the best parts about our education system are really what happens here. Not the mullet, no, so much. I mean, maybe it'll come back in. I think the Oklahoma State football coach is trying to bring it back, But the teacher with the red tie in the middle that looks about the same age as the rest of us, that was Miss Richardson. She became Mrs. Basinger when she got married one year during the summer. That was confusing for some of us, how the same person had a different name, but we learned a little bit there. The girl behind her is about the same age. She was actually an 8th grader. So I'm the guy over at the far left there that was trying to grow chest hair and apparently couldn't button my own shirt on picture day. I'm sure my mom was glad about that. And then the two people standing next to me are my brother and my sister there. My brother had those cool glasses before that was in too. But anyway, and I just want to show you that because that was back when I could grow hair. I had a little cowlick there. It's fallen out by now. But the greatest part about this school was that families were all involved. The community was all involved. Every student in that picture graduated from high school on time. Most of them were in the top 10% of their high school graduating class. So most of us went on to Nebraska City High School. There were about 100 kids in each class there. But almost all of them were academically and socially and emotionally prepared for success in life because the whole community was involved in that. And it's interesting now when I go around the country and talk to big school districts about what's working in our education system and what we need to fix, almost all the time they point back to a model like this. And they call it a micro school, and it's shown up in hippie places like Austin or Portland or wherever all the cool people hang out now. I don't know. But they put schools together like this where they mix different ages of students and put them in the same room together, and they learn from each other, where the 7th graders are reading to the 1st graders and these kind of things. So a lot of the things that we all share as a common upbringing are really, I think our society has kind of figured out, we need to kind of go back to our roots and what was working in our models there. Now, is it scalable to put a school like this on every block in a big city? Probably not. I mean, financially that would be hard to pull off. But there's some things about our rural upbringing and the way that we've been doing things in rural Nebraska for a long time that really fit. The other picture I want to show you is back when I could grow hair, and back when my FFA advisor had the coolest tie ever. Raise your hand if you've ever seen that goofy tie. I know that was kind of a thing for FFA advisors and ag teachers back in the day, but I had the opportunity to serve as the president of our local FFA chapter in Nebraska City, and then went on to be a state officer where I got to go into many of your communities and spend time in classrooms and teaching and thinking with students about their future, goal setting and career advice and planning for the future, and really have appreciated that. Since then, I've served on some boards for career and technical education and helping students connect school and work. I think the best advice I'd have for school leaders today, and then we'll kind of get into the other topics, but the best advice I have for school leaders is to do more about helping the school place of today look more like the workplace of tomorrow. It feels like there's a societal trend where we're kind of coddling our students a little bit, and this is therapy as a parent of 4 kids, I'm trying to figure out how to recreate some of the real work experiences for my kids living in the suburbs of Omaha right now, as opposed to growing up on a farm where my parents would leave for the weekend when I was 12 and I was in charge, and that was real responsibility. Sorting out the trash and recycling is not the same level of real responsibility as the fence is broken, the pigs are out, and the neighbors are gone. You're it, figure it out. So, but I just think there's real opportunities for us to connect the real world of work of the future to some of the school experiences we have today. This afternoon we'll have an opportunity to kind of wrap things up for the day, and I'll share some of Gallup's research on millennials in the workplace and some of the focus on how the world of work and really our society has changed over time, and we'll kind of revisit that a little bit later. But mostly I just want to show you this to prove that I could grow hair at one point and it wasn't all coming in gray like it is now that I've got kids. I really want to get you to connect here a little bit and think about your own workplace. Now, I know, how many of you are directly involved in production agriculture now, family farm, your day job is, okay? Raise your hand if you work in an office building that has 20 or more employees in it. I know there's a few of you here as well. So some of us go to an office and there's people in the parking lot who work in the same building, and we interact with them throughout the day. And some of us are pretty much on our own, or maybe we've got a sibling or a partner or somebody else that's working with us out on the production agriculture farm. But when you think about your best days at work, regardless of whether you're somebody who gets 2 paychecks a month, regardless of what the corn price is and whether it rained that week or not, or if you're somebody who puts all the work in and then at the end of the year you kind of find out how you did, much of it within your control, but a whole bunch of it not in your control, regardless of how you define your job or your workplace, I'd like for you to think about what does it mean to be in a great workplace? Think about your best days at work and what that really looked like. And I'll just have you talk to somebody right next to you there for just a minute and share some of those words or phrases that describe what's a great workplace like for you, your best days at work. So take just a minute with a couple people next to you and share a couple of highlights about your best days at work. Go ahead. All right, let me hear a few examples. What's a word or a phrase, or when you think about your best day at work, what really stands out to you? Who's got an example? Just shout it out. When the weather breaks and the sun comes out. Yeah, some things within our control, some things not as much, but yeah, there's that. What else? When the weather's the only thing that breaks. Thank you. Yeah, do your materials and equipment kind of work for you, right? Exactly. What else? Yeah, you enjoy what you do. You have a good feeling at the end of the day, maybe a sense of accomplishment. You feel a little purpose in it. Yeah. You said it was simple. That's not simple, but that's important. A couple more.
Positive work environment.
Yeah, a positive work environment. You actually enjoy being there. Thank God it's Monday. There's people who wake up on Mondays and are just miserable because they got to go to the grind again. And there's cheers and chores, right? There's some things we love to do, some things we get to do anyway. But yeah, that good feeling at the end of a day. What else? One more. Laughter. Yeah, you have some fun. Go ahead. This isn't the family therapy session. That might be later. But yeah, when you don't argue with your old man or whoever, right, about a decision, when your opinion counts maybe, right? I mean, I know there's a lot of people in transition, generation to generation in this room. And at what point does your opinion start to count? You're 32 years old, you're 35 years old, you're an adult too, but you're still the child of the person who you're working with. And so there's dynamics there. I'm going to not get too deep in that in case some of you are here with a sibling or a family member and don't want to go there right now. But yeah, for sure. So some of the things you mentioned, so Gallup's done all this research. We're the same poll that interrupts your dinner and asks you questions about the president or your job or whatever. And we've asked these questions around the world, in every country in the world. We've asked these questions over 35 million times to say, what does it mean to have a great workplace? And really what it comes down to, and the words are kind of small, but I'll call out a couple of these. These are the 12 questions that really stand out, or 12 statements that really define a great relationship with your job. Are you engaged at work? So when you're engaged, you're involved with and you're enthusiastic about, you love your job, you're committed to your work, and it's more than just a paycheck, it's a calling, it's a purpose. There's a real value in that. And some of the things you called out here, but do you know what's expected of you at work? Do you have the materials and equipment you need to do your work right? Like the weather's not the only thing that breaks, or the weather is the only thing that breaks that day. I know a lot of you spend most of your time fixing things and planning for the next thing. So do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? Do you feel like your strengths fit your work? Or did you just kind of fall in the job and that's just but how can you figure out who you are at your best and then integrate that more into your day-to-day work? In the last 7 days, have you received recognition or praise for doing good work? I know a lot of you go weeks and weeks and months between positive feedback from a coworker, and you just kind of get in the work, but we need to pause and say, you know what, that went really well, or I think this is the best year we've ever had because of this, or I really appreciated the way you diffused that situation with that contractor, that person we were working with, and thanks for doing that. So we need that positive recognition on a regular basis. Does your supervisor or someone at work seem to care about you as a person? Again, the dynamics of a small family business in many of our cases make that challenging, right? But does somebody at work care about you as a person, or are you just going through the motions here? That's important for our emotions. Is there someone at work who encourages your development? Not just going through the process, but how can we take a step back and think about how would we do that differently, or what do we learn from that situation? At work, do your opinions seem to count? Again, family dynamics at play make that one a challenge sometimes. But at what point are we colleagues as well? We wear a lot of hats. Does the mission or purpose of your work make you feel it's important? Are your fellow employees committed to doing quality work? If we just ask the question, are you committed to quality work? Almost everybody says yes. But when we think about how engaged you are with your job, we have to tweak the wording a little bit and say, are your fellow employees committed to quality work? So maybe you manage one part of the business and you have a sibling or a coworker or somebody else who manages another part of the business. Maybe you think you're doing a great job, but you're frustrated with their performance. Well, that drags down your engagement too, because the reputation of the whole enterprise is driven by that. So there's that old adage, a chain is only as strong as the weakest link. Some of you have literally experienced that phenomenon with a chain. I don't know why they call it a handyman jack either. I think there's nothing handy about it, and everybody's got a bent thumb if you've ever used one of those. But you know, we've got to have coworkers who are committed to quality, not just our own personal level of quality. Do you have a best friend at work? Now, in most organizations, people roll around on the floor and throw a fit when we ask that question, because they say, why don't you say, do you have a respected colleague at work? Or they try and cheapen the question. We say, do you have a best friend at work? Because if you can say yes to that, you love your job in a different way. You're spending a lot of time with your coworkers. If you're best friends with them, even better. There's a real synergy that comes with that and a real value with that. In the last 6 months, has someone at work talked to you about your progress? Again, taking a step back and thinking about how are we doing and where are we headed? And then the last question is even bigger. In the last year, have you had opportunities at work to learn and grow? Where's this all headed? So when we ask those 12 questions within organizations, with small businesses, with global companies, whatever, we run the data on that and we come up with 3 different groups of employees. The first group we call engaged. So engaged employees love their jobs. They're involved with and enthusiastic about and committed to their work. It's not just their head and their hands that are in the work, but their heart's in it. They have an emotional relationship with their job, and that's a good thing. So only about a third of the U.S. workforce falls in that engaged employees category, about 31% on our latest polling. Globally, it's only about 13%. So you think it's bad in this country, but I know the government shut down last night. If the Secretary of Labor or somebody called Gallup and said, what should we do to fix our economy so that we don't have these debts that close down our government, we might say, well, only about a third of our employees are currently engaged with their job. Let's think about policies that would encourage people to get more emotionally invested and love their jobs more. So if only about a third are engaged, where are the rest? Well, about half of them are in a middle category we call not engaged. Not engaged is not necessarily a bad thing, but there's untapped potential. They might like their job, but they don't love it. They're satisfied with it in many cases, but they're not engaged. So again, they're going through the motions, they're getting the work done, but their heart's not fully in it. Maybe it's been months since they've had positive feedback. Maybe they don't feel like their opinion counts. They're good at the specific job they do, but it just feels like a process, you know, they just go through for whatever, throughout the season. And that leaves about a sixth of the U.S. workforce, about 16, 17%, who are actively disengaged at their job. They're ticked off and they're not afraid to say so. And you've met some of them. I met one of them at the pool last night. No, I didn't. That's not true. But they're, you know, sometimes we call them road warriors. They're retired on active duty. I did talk to somebody at breakfast whose dad's around 70 years old and still thinks, you know, there's a phasing out of retirement that they're not really talking about, but they both, at least one of them knows is happening, right? Some of you are familiar with that dynamic in your own environments. So sometimes we're retired on active duty if we're actively disengaged on our job. Or sometimes they're cave dwellers. They're consistently against virtually everything, if you think about that. So many of you have colleagues who know that you're here, and they know that you, because they're covering for you or whatever, and you'll hear about it when you get home. But they might even ask you, hey, what'd you learn at that conference? And you'll talk about how you learned how beer is made last night, or you learned how combines are made, or you know, some of the tours, or something you learned today. And you might share that with them. And many times they're going to look at you and say, well, that won't work here. You know, because they're consistently against virtually everything. It's just draining to be around people who are actively disengaged in their jobs. And it's probably even worse than draining for us. It's probably just terrible for their health. If you're stressed out and you hate your job, you're much more likely, and we've done some medical research with some of our hospital clients and other organizations, the disease burden, the stress level, the likelihood that you're going to have a heart attack is higher if you hate your job. So let's figure out what we can do to help you hate your job a little less, or maybe even get you in that engaged category where you'd love your job. We've done some, I worked on a project a few years ago where we actually had to buy some cheek swabs, and we were doing these cortisol tests. So we'd ask people those 12 questions that were on that last slide, and then we'd do a cheek swab where they'd kind of put a Q-tip in their mouth, and then they'd put it in an envelope, and we'd mail it off to some lab somewhere where they'd check your cortisol level, your stress response, you know. And people who love their jobs are much less likely to be stressed, which has huge implications for our physical health. And we'll talk about well-being in a moment. But But just real important that we think about what kind of workplace are we personally experiencing and what kind of workplace are we creating for our colleagues and for people who look to us for leadership. And we'll revisit that a little bit more in a minute. So I really want to start with that mindset around what's a great workplace look like. So another kind of Gallup poll here, a little audience participation. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to throw your hand up in the air if this is true about you. So many of us will answer yes to more than one. So let me give you a few. Raise your hand if you're somebody who always talks to people in elevators, on airplanes, wherever you go. That's just you. Get it up high. Yeah, I mean, everybody else doesn't want to be stuck on an elevator with you. They just want to chill out and get back to their room. So at Gallup, we would call that woo, right? You have a talent for winning others over. You're just charismatic. You get in the grocery line, and the lady behind you is your new best friend. She didn't know it was coming, but that's just you, right? Okay, really good. Next one, raise your hand if you're almost always write down a list of things to do and stick to it. That second part's important because, I mean, I'm sure most of us, keep your hand up if that's true about you, even on the weekends or when you're on vacation. Yeah. Keep your hand up if you've ever been to counseling because the person you care most about is not that way, right? Okay, so we'll have you can put your hand down now, but yeah, you're having a moment there, right? Okay, so yeah, some of us are very disciplined, conscientious in our approach to things. Maybe we have an achiever talent where we make a list of things to do and really stick to it. And sometimes it's good intentions, but it just doesn't always happen. So yeah, we're all a little different in that way. Raise your hand if you're somebody who always has to pick somebody to race when you're driving. Okay? Yeah, that's maybe a competitive talent. Now, sometimes you're just late and you would have said no to the last thing about being on time, but sometimes you just make everything into a contest, right? And some of you are even want to be the first one to raise your hand on that question. You're so competitive, right? So some of us just have this natural competitive edge, and other people would say, no, I don't have to win every race. I just want to make sure, whatever. You'd interpret it differently. Okay, raise your hand if you're somebody who's always skeptical until you're given some proof. This one's fun to watch because some of you are like, I'm not even sure I want to say yes to this question because this guy, I don't even know what this guy's talking about. Yeah, so some of us are more analytical in our approach, and we just need to have some evidence. I don't want to just buy that new hybrid until I've seen some of the trials, or I'm never going to buy the first technology. I'm going to let my neighbors get it and break it, and I want version 2, right? Because I'm never going to be, right? I'm not the early adapter. So some people more analytical in their approach. All right, how about this one? Raise your hand if you're somebody who has a color-coded or otherwise organized closet. Okay? Now, again, some of us are surrounded by two people who raised their hand and you didn't, right? So, yeah, some people have different types of organization. Sometimes, anybody have 2 piles and you smell it, and if it's dirty, it goes in the, right? Okay? Yeah, and so some people are more honest than others, too, and we'll take that, right? So these are all talents. And, okay, last one. Raise your hand if you're somebody who always figures out the plot of the movie before anybody else. Okay? Yeah. Do you realize that the person next to you also paid $9 to be there? So don't ruin it, okay? Keep it to yourself. You can talk about it later. I have a good friend that was, he'd just gotten a Netflix subscription. His wife and he were over at our house the other day, and they were talking about binge watching one of these shows, right? And so but they didn't always watch it together because they both have different schedules, and he had accidentally watched kind of the last episode, and then at dinner that night they were talking about it, and boy, that ruined the whole series for him. So yeah, sometimes we're more strategic. We're kind of thinking about what's going to happen next, and that you're somebody who pieces things together. All of those reasons you raised your hand is evidence that there's a talent that you might be claiming here, something that you might just do really well, something that's just a naturally recurring pattern of thought, feeling, behavior that can be productively applied. So I wasn't there back in the 1960s. I won't ask you to raise your hand if you were, but looking around the room, there's a few who probably were, and many of us who probably definitely weren't. But this is a picture of what the Library of Psychology looked like back in the 1960s. If you can't see the top sign there, it says, "What's wrong with people?" Almost all of the federal money and the research dollars and everything else in psychology was going into the study of weakness and fixing what's wrong with people. Now, my daughter, Ainsley, some of you might have met her last night. She probably cut you in line at the water park. She's 10 years old now and a beautiful girl. When Ainsley was born, she had what's called a bilateral cleft lip. And if you're not familiar with that, her mom and I called it her crooked smirk. So in the womb, her top lip never fully developed. So when she was born, she had kind of this crooked smile. And so we didn't know there was anything wrong with her, because you look at your own child and you think they're perfect, right? Because they're half you, and right? We think, thankfully she got her good looks from her mom, except for the imperfections. But anyway, so here we are looking at this daughter thinking everything's great, but people would walk by and say, oh, what a cute baby. And then they'd be like, what's wrong with her lip? And I'm like, what's wrong with you for saying something like that? Geez, people. So anyway, we realized after a couple of conversations and after we got a good night's sleep that there was probably something here that needed to be fixed, right? There's a physical imperfection. Now, thankfully, that's not a big deal. It wasn't in her cleft palate at all, so it was just cosmetic. It was just so that, that we could do a couple surgeries and no one later on in life would even notice that something was wrong with her. There are times we have weaknesses in life that we need to fix. But there's a whole lot more to life than just fixing what's wrong with ourselves, our children, whatever. If as parents, Jen and I would have said, okay, good, we've done the surgery, everything looks good, the stitches are out, the scarring is gone, no one will even notice, everything's fine. If we would have just said, good, as parents, we're done with that one, we'll move on to our little brother, that would be considered poor parenting, right? Because there's a lot of work for all of us yet to be done, but particularly with our kids in situations like that. So a quick story, we were at Children's Hospital here, and we were in for a consultation and kind of sitting around the waiting room. Now, this is a plastic surgery clinic. So, of course, as somebody who codes people for a living, I'm looking around wondering what she's in for and what he's in for and all this kind of thing. And my wife looks at me, and she's a lot nicer than me, but she says, now, what are you thinking about over there? You're deep in thought. You're kind of in analyst mode here. And I said, well, I'm just kind of wondering what everybody's in here for. And she just, without missing a beat, she looks at me, she goes, they're wondering the same thing about you. Like, where are they going to start with that mess? So, I don't know. Like I say, she's a lot nicer than me. So if the focus of psychology a generation ago or 50 years ago was all about what's wrong with people, why am I bringing that up right now? Well, I'm bringing it up right now because back around that same time, Don Clifton was a professor of educational psychology at the University of Nebraska who said, why are we always focusing on what's wrong with people? He had served the country in the war and seen some destruction and devastation and said, there's more to life than breaking things down and just fixing what's wrong with people. Let's pay attention to what's right about people. Is there something right about people? And early in my career at Gallup, I worked real closely with Don, and I remember him saying, you can do something better than 10,000 other people. Now, I don't know what that thing is yet, but every one of us has some wiring that says you're just naturally good at this. You're comfortable speaking to groups. You're comfortable analyzing numbers. You're comfortable building relationships. You're comfortable, with whatever it is that you might have raised your hand about before. So we know there's some people who just have a natural predisposition to do certain things well. And Don said, I'm just going to commit the rest of my life to figuring out what that is and to identify what's right about people. So a lot of books were written and a lot of analysis done. And I started at Gallup in 2000. About that same time, we launched an assessment called the Strengths Finder. It's called Clifton Strengths now. Any of you, show of hands, you ever heard of Strengths Finder, been through that? Yeah, dozens of people in this room. Almost 18 million people around the world have taken this Clifton Strengths assessment and identified what those patterns of talent are that they have, and then hopefully had some developmental experience to do something with it. So I remember vividly a conversation with Don. Would have been about 2001 or 2. We'd had 400,000 people take StrengthsFinder. We had a champagne toast in the office in Lincoln, a big celebration of this achievement because we all thought that was a big deal. And I remember riding up the elevator with Don. We were down the atrium, we were going up to 5th floor, and I asked him in the elevator, I said, Don, congratulations. I mean, that's got to feel great. This thing that you built, and 400,000 people have benefited from it. And without missing a beat, he looked at me and said, Tim, it's a good start. And I thought, you have higher goals than I do about this life. But he had significance as a talent. He had futuristic as a talent. He had this picture of how great the future could be if people could not just focus on what's wrong with them, but think about what they do well. And if you want to think about a legacy, I mean, in the time since Don passed away, 16, 17 million people have benefited from his life's work. I just hope somebody shows up and puts flowers on my grave every few years, But you think about a legacy, there's a real mindset change that's happened. And some of you may have heard of names like Dan Pink or Danny Kahneman or Barbara Fredrickson. I mean, there's a whole team of researchers now who are called positive psychologists or behavioral economists who are studying people's emotions and how we can harness those for good. But it really did start right here in Nebraska with Don's important question: what will happen when we think about what's right with people rather than just fixating on what's wrong with them? And one of the big takeaways is people who focus on their strengths are happier, they're more productive, they have higher well-being. So it's not just a feel-good kind of a thing, it's a do-good kind of a thing. If we know who we are when we're at our best, we're going to perform better throughout the rest of our life. And it's not quite that easy. It takes a little bit of effort to make it happen, but certainly it's a good start. So we talk about talent as being your natural capacity for excellence. It's something inside you that every one of us can do. If you take this Clifton Strengths Assessment, at the end, it takes 20 minutes or so, you answer a bunch of questions, and many of you know this. At the end, you get a report that says, here's your top 5 themes of talent, some things that you do best. And I'd recommend, if you work in a family business or any kind of an environment, have your colleagues, your family members do this as well and get together and talk about it. We've done it with my family, of course, because I get paid to do this, and my wife knew she was a study from the beginning when we were dating, because I started at Gallup, and I accepted my job at Gallup and proposed to my wife on the same day. So she knew what she was getting into, right, from the beginning. But we regularly talk about our talents. Jen and I both have maximizer and positivity and belief in our top 5. So there's a lot of overlap in our family about we don't do bored, we don't do crabby, we don't do average. I mean, we've got certain standards about our house. But my wife has developer and empathy. She's a great teacher. She's taught preschool. She's home with our kids now. This is her calling in life. Where I've got woo and relator, so I love being around people. And so if you saw us last night, she's like, "Can we go yet?" And I'm like, "Oh, I haven't met that guy yet," or "I still want to do this one thing." So we're all different. We need to understand first, who am I when I'm at my best? And then our closest colleagues, family members, what are their talents and how do we complement each other? What do I have that she doesn't have or he doesn't have? And how can we kind of work that through? Because it's not likely you're going to change your talents, but it's sure likely you can develop within your areas of talent and build a better appreciation for those around us. But it's not just enough to identify your talents. You got to do something with it. So you identify your talents, then you have to invest in it. You've got to build it out. You've got to practice it. So if you've got a talent for woo, as an example, winning others over, you probably shouldn't spend all day, every day alone. Put yourself in situations in the community. Be a greeter at church or volunteer in a community organization where you've got opportunities to do some networking. Come to things like this and be intentional about collecting names and contact information and expanding your network. That's a talent you have. So practice that a little bit. When you do that, that's when it really becomes a strength, something that is you can consistently provide near perfect performance. So talent is really your potential should you choose to accept it. And you may not look at your report and say, I love all 5 of these, I'm going to do something with all of them. Pick one, pick 2, and be intentional about developing those. You can spend the rest of your life tapping into the potential that you have in those areas. So the world still says try and be a little bit good at everything. Some of your jobs require that you be a little bit good at everything. I go back and help my dad at harvest, which means I do the fun parts of farming, right? Driving the tractor from the field when it's got the paycheck in the back. But boy, he spends all day fixing stuff. And that's not who I am. I mean, I'd have a hard time with that. If I was on the farm, I'd spend all day just calling the mechanic and the plumber and everybody else, and there went my paycheck, right? So sometimes you have to build knowledge and skills that are broad, but as much as you can, figure out what your talents are, what you're great at, and then get to the outcomes through that door as best you can. So developmentally, just as kind of 4 words to think about, how do you really turn your talents into a strength? The first one is mission. It's helpful that you've got something you believe in, a calling, a mission, a purpose in your life. And if you can identify what that is and align your strengths towards that. Aristotle, probably 1,000 years ago, said something to the effect of where you identify a need in the world and something that you can accomplish, therein lies your purpose. So if there's something in the world that maybe it's feeding the world, maybe it's helping, small business loans be affordable for people, whatever it is that's a passion for you, figure out what that is, and then figure out what your best talents are, and figure out how you can marry the two and really drive that home. So mission is critically important. Relationships. We all are social beings. Some of us more than others, right? Some of you are exhausted already and it's only 9:30 in the morning because you've been around all these people all day and you just want to go back to your room. I get it. We're all wired differently, but we all need relationships that are meaningful in our life. You go back to engagement, a lot of those 12 questions involve another person providing feedback or coaching or recognition. So that's critically important. Expectations. None of us are going to achieve well unless somebody expects something of us in ways that are consistent with our talents. We got to work with people to set important goals and think big about the future. And what do we want to do 20 years from now? And how can the decisions we make today really contribute to that? We'll talk about financial well-being in just a second, but it's a short and long-term kind of component. And then celebration. There's no excellence without celebration. At Gallup, and this has been a thing for forever, every month we get the whole office together, and right now there's 400 or 500 of us down at the riverfront here in Omaha, and we get together every month, and we have a big party where every job group celebrates somebody as their all-star, and we have an MVP of the whole Omaha office, and then we have royal stars about everybody around the company. And sometimes, we just this week had people in from all around the world at the office and spent 3 or 4 days together, and at the end we had recognition. Sometimes when you go to a recognition banquet, you kind of leave feeling empty because you know you did something and yet you don't have an award you're carrying out the door, and that can feel frustrating. And that happens around Gallup and everywhere else. Our Chief Operating Officer, Jane Miller, is the one who facilitates this reward and recognition celebration every month. And one of the lines that she has that just sticks with me is, if you're not getting enough recognition, you're probably not giving enough recognition. Sometimes we think the recognition has to come from the boss, or has to come from the owner, or has to come from, the formal thing. We've got to inject more moments of recognition throughout. The question on our engagement survey is, in the last 7 days, have you received recognition or praise for doing good work? We don't say in the last year, we say in the last 7 days. Now, some people literally look at their calendar and think back 7 days. If it was 8 days ago, they say no. Almost everybody looks at that item and says, if I have to think very hard about the last time I was recognized, it was probably too long ago. So we've got to create cultures of recognition because it's good for all of us. The ideas flow faster. We're just better when we're providing feedback to each other about how we're doing and coaching and so on. So last thing we'll chat about here is this idea about what a great life looks like. When we've done all kinds of surveys around the world and help people kind of unpack what does a great life look like. Just take a big step back and say, why are we here? What's the purpose of all of this? It really sorts pretty well into these 5 areas. We'll walk through these in a bit more detail, but there's got to be a purpose. How you occupy your time. Do you like what you do each day? My grandma lived on the farm. The farmland we bought was actually the land that she and Grandpa bought over 80 years ago. She passed away last year, she was 104 years old. But you think about, she, for more years of her life than not, she didn't have a paycheck or a day-to-day job, right? She'd been retired since before most of us were born, And so you think about how she lived decades of her life. In the last couple of years in a nursing home, she still had to have a purpose to get her up out of bed every morning. Something she was going to do, whether that was to go have breakfast with a friend or play a game of Rummikub or whatever it was for her. There was some purpose how she occupied her time that needed to have value. Social well-being, we'll talk about financial well-being, both short and long-term, physical well-being, and community well-being. So we'll just unpack these a bit, and then I'd be glad to take any questions or takeaways from you here. So the first one is this purpose or career well-being. Do you like what you do each day and how you occupy your time? Is it just kind of going through the grind so that someday you can retire and do something different with your time? I mean, we all have dreams and things we'd like to do, and if you won the lottery, there's probably a few things you'd do differently. I know I would, or I think I would, right? But you still have to have some purpose about what that's like. Interesting and meaningful activities. Do you have opportunities to use your strengths? Do you have some goals that you're working towards, and are you checking in on your progress towards that and feeling some satisfaction? And again, if you're involved in production agriculture, there's kind of a start and end point to your seasons, right? Depending on when it snows, when it freezes, sometimes a start and end point sooner than you'd like it to be or later, but there's a kind of a season about that. We've got to reflect back and take stock, not just when we're paying our taxes or filing some form, but on a regular basis. How are we doing? And then do you have a leader or a colleague who motivates you and somebody who you really enjoy being around that makes a big connection? So just kind of 3 takeaways on how do you improve your career well-being or your purpose in life. Every day, find out what your strengths are and then be intentional about using those on a regular basis. So how do you do more of what you do best every day? Identify somebody who's got a shared purpose or a shared mission and partner with them. Now, many of you by default are in a partnership with family business or things like that. Figure out where your shared mission is and how you can really build some synergy into that. And then third is to opt into more social time with people you enjoy being around. And again, some of you are going to be together whether you want to be or not. But if you've got somebody you really enjoy being around, be more intentional about that. This is the time of year when people have already punted on their New Year's resolutions. Raise your hand if you're still active on one of your New Year's resolutions, or have you given up? There's a few. Okay, last Wednesday, the 17th of January, was the day on the calendar that's officially Ditch Your New Year's Resolution Day. I didn't know that was a thing, but I was working on something the other day and I came across that. So if you're one of the 4 people who still had their hand up, good job on you. But we've got these goals in our life and what we want to accomplish. Certainly some of them relate to our career. The second area is the social well-being. I put the water park picture in there for those of you who still kind of have water in your ear from the slides last night. If you have a 10-year-old daughter who likes water slides more than you, but you have to go anyway, you know what I'm talking about. But relationships and love in our life. Do we have a network of friends? Is there a mentor who encourages your development? Somebody you look up to and admire. Maybe they don't know that. Maybe they need to. Maybe there's somebody looking up to you that admires you and you need to build those connections. Every one of us needs to have a mentor and needs to be a mentor. Regardless of where you are in life, there's somebody who knows more about something or can contribute more to something, and you're that person for somebody else. So we really got to build those relationships and think that through. Our closest relationships matter a lot, and being intentional about planning out some activities. Not to just use a water park analogy, but you were there last night, kids want to go again tonight, you're kind of thinking maybe not, maybe we'll get a movie and stay in the room or whatever. I mean, to be intentional about planning those activities and those moments is incredibly important. You reflect back on that years later. We all have experiences from our childhood where we think back and, every time you tell the story, the fish gets a little bigger and the story gets a little longer and the whatever. So we got to create those moments that really matter. So for social well-being, and this is going to be tough for some of you, my dad's would throw a fit about this, 6 hours a day in social interaction. I just saw something this week where the average teenager spends at least 4 hours a day social interaction on their phone. So maybe it's not as hard for kids or students to be able to accomplish this, but we all need a few hours of social interaction every day to really be at our best. There's an individual difference. Some people, a couple hours is probably feels like enough, but the research says 6 hours a day, when you add all that up, that's pretty helpful for social well-being. Strengthen the mutual connections in your network. If you know somebody and they live in a different city, but they're doing something similar, those networks are incredibly important. I think that's a real advantage of a meeting like this, where you get to build some of those networks. And then as often as possible, mix social time with physical activity. If you like playing golf, call up a friend and join the golf league. Or if you enjoy fantasy football, maybe that's your thing. Or if we can integrate physical activity with our social activity, there's a real synergy there. Just signing up for a gym membership isn't going to help necessarily, for most of us. But signing up for a gym membership with a friend and saying we're going to meet every morning at 6 o'clock, because now they're counting on me to be there. I don't want to go today, but he's going, so I guess I will. So the more we can integrate those, the better. So the next one, financial well-being. This one kind of causes us to wonder when corn prices are $3 a bushel, and it's a tough time to in certain sectors of the economy right now. But when we look at financial well-being, it's really about managing within your means right now, and also thinking well about the long-term financial security. So every one of us has a budget that we have to meet, whether we physically write down a budget or it just kind of. I dated a girl in high school once that it was mostly her idea that we didn't go on the second date, but that's another story. But she had this mentality that if there were checks left in the checkbook, there was money left in the account. That's not true. If this is news to you, you're welcome, right? And some of you are lenders in the room and think it's cool to charge $20 every time somebody bounces a check. Again, the more we can be intentional about our financial life, the better, and planning ahead, short-term and long-term. So are we making progress on our standard of living? We all have aspirations to have things be better than they might have been a generation ago. Our kids will believe the same thing. So how can we make progress about that and manage within our means? What we've realized is it's not how much money you make, it's how you live within the means based on the amount of money that you make. My family certainly wasn't wealthy as I was a child, but I never missed a meal. We had everything. We probably had an Atari instead of a Nintendo, or there was something like that where maybe I felt like I was deprived. But I reasonably well-adjusted adult. I turned out all right as far as that goes. So we've got to figure out how do we live within our means and make that work. Once your basic needs are met, that additional dollar isn't going to create as much additional well-being. So again, if somebody wanted to give me a winning Powerball ticket a few days ago and I was the kid in Florida with $400 million or whatever it was, that seems like it'd be kind of fun for a while. But for most people, even when you study people who have big inheritance or big lottery winnings or something like that, maybe it feels really good at the beginning. But once they kind of get it out of their system, we sort of all go back to where we were before. So well-being is not as much about how much money we have, but how well we do living within our means. So the takeaways on that, buy experiences. You could buy a big screen TV or buy a new vehicle or buy a new something like that, and maybe you need to in some cases, but Last summer, my wife and I took our kids on this 2-week kind of epic Clark Griswold family vacation. We drove out to California. Every night we were packing in and packing out of this rented minivan with a big storage thing on the roof. And I mean, we're going to talk about that night we camped out in Yosemite Park for the rest of our lives. Our kids are going to talk about with their therapist someday. I mean, these experiences, right? You know what I mean? These experiences matter a lot. We spent like $800 to take our kids to Disney because apparently you're supposed to do that. I don't know, Disney's brainwashed us all into thinking we're bad parents if we don't do that someday. Maybe you're a Disney family, that's cool. We spent $800 to spend the day at Disney. We get home, we're driving through rural Colorado or Utah or wherever we were on the way home and talking to the kids about the best parts of our vacation. And they started listing things out, going to the beach. It cost $10 to park at the beach. That was our entire budget. We got Domino's pizza delivered. I mean, it was the cheapest day of all was their favorite day. Then visiting their friends in Los Angeles, that was number 2. And then number 3 was camping out in Yosemite. And I'm like, what about Disney? And they're like, oh, that was good. And I'm thinking, what? We spent $800 and that was good? Sometimes it's not good for me when the credit card bill comes through, right? Sometimes it's not about how much money we spend, but it's about the memories that we create in the process. So if you got to decide between buying a new thing or spending money on an experience, even if it's that $800 trip to Disney, invest in those experiences because you'll reflect back on them later, years later. We all have those experiences from our own childhood that we'll reflect back on. So spend on others instead of just on material possessions, and then establish default systems. This one's a big one that kind of sneaks up on you. So at Gallup, when you join, we assume you want to have a healthy retirement. So when you sign your new hire paperwork, we automatically assume you want to save for your retirement. Now, you can opt out real easy. All you have to do is say, I don't want to contribute to my 401k, and you won't. But we assume everybody wants to have financial security someday, so we set up that positive default. Same kind of thing is true with being a heart donor, an organ donor. In this country, all you have to do is when you go get your driver's license, check that box that says, I'll be an organ donor, and you are. But the government or whoever sets that up assumes that nobody wants to be an organ donor, so you have to opt in. Well, it's a single-digit percentage of people who opt in about being an organ donor. There's countries in Europe where the government assumes everybody wants to be an organ donor, and all you have to do is check a box to opt out, and it's a single-digit percentage of people who actually opt out. Now, it sounds weird because donating your organs after you die is an incredibly personal decision, and there's a lot of emotion that goes into that. But apparently, most people don't care. They just kind of assume whatever the government decides is the right answer. Almost nobody opts out of either option. So try as best you can to create a situation where if you're somebody who gets a regular paycheck, assume that some of that needs to go to savings before it goes into your own bank account. Kind of hide it from yourself and set up that positive default. Assume you want to invest in a retirement savings or save towards something, and kind of hide it from yourself so it doesn't become a distraction. Because if it's in the account, you'll probably spend it. So if you can create those default systems. Same thing's true when we go to the grocery store. I mean, if you're somebody who eats too many Cheetos after midnight, don't buy the Cheetos and don't put them in your pantry, because if it's there, I'm weak, I'm going to eat them, right? But if they're not there, that's a good default system to set up. So that's kind of something to think about there. Last couple, you might recognize this picture here, just a shameless plug for the Farm Bureau Golf Tournament. If you've never participated, I was supposed to. One of these guys in that picture had my spot because I got called away at the last minute for work. So I made a donation to the Farm Bureau and didn't even get to play golf. So, you're welcome or whatever. But the more, yeah, there we go. But the more we can have this physical well-being. So it really comes down to three things: diet, sleep, and exercise, right? So we know we're supposed to eat healthier foods. I grew up on a pig farm. I ate my weight in bacon on a regular basis. It probably shows, there's good things about that too. But the more we can make good choices about what we put in our body, the better. The more we can have some exercise. Now, many of you have jobs where you're not sitting in an office all day, but we've done a lot of research around Gallup where we've kind of said sitting is the new smoking. I mean, we spend way too much time sitting and in sedentary jobs. So if you're somebody who's at an office job or you're sitting around most of the day, figure out ways to move more naturally throughout the day. If you're somebody who wants to exercise, there's a lot of different plans that you can sign up for, but 20 minutes a day getting your heart rate up in the morning, breaking a sweat, that's probably a good thing because then you get a boost in your mood throughout the rest of the day. But diet, sleep, exercise, all important. And the more, again, you can integrate things like physical activity with social activity, the better. So the takeaways on that: at least 20 minutes a day of physical activity. Some of you have plenty of physical activity anyway, but if you don't, then that's a good idea. Sleep enough to feel well rested. For most people, that's 7 or 8 hours. In college, there's this mentality of pulling all-nighters, like that's going to help you do better on the test the next day. The research shows you're better off just going to bed at a reasonable time. Your brain actually continues to study while you're sleeping, wish I would have known that 20 years ago, right? And then you'll wake up in the morning more alert and well rested, and you'll actually do better on the exam. So think about that. If you got a big meeting tomorrow, get a good night's sleep tonight, and you'll actually be better off tomorrow. And then set those positive defaults when you shop for groceries and that kind of thing. And then the last is community well-being. So as we've studied the different elements of well-being across our U.S. and around the world, one thing we've realized is that rural America in particular struggles in some areas of well-being. Depending on the economy, financial well-being is a challenge for rural America. Physical well-being in rural America is tough. There's a higher rate of obesity in rural parts of the country than in the cities in general. So some of these areas as a rural America, we kind of struggle. Community well-being, we knock it out of the park. Community well-being is higher in rural America than it is in the city. So this is a big advantage of the 5. Community well-being involves, do you feel safe? We ask a question on our global polling. Do you feel safe walking alone at night? Okay. If you lost your wallet, do you feel like it would be returned with the contents intact? I don't think my parents have ever locked their house. I don't even know if they have keys to the house out on the farm, right? How many of you don't even know if you have a key to your front door, right? Because you just don't. And I'm like, why don't we lock the door? I come home from college, after locking my dorm room, and I'm like, why don't you guys lock the door? And Mom's like, well, what if the UPS man comes? How's he going to get in to leave the package on the counter? And I'm like, okay. I've been living in Omaha too long or something, but there's a different mentality in rural America about community well-being. We assume people are good until proven otherwise, where once you're in the city, you assume everybody's a creep or a thief or something, so you lock your doors and shut them out, and everybody's got a front porch, but nobody actually sits on them in the city anymore. But out in the country, we naturally interact with one another and more. We take pride in our communities. There was a great anybody from Pender area, there was a great article in the World Herald last week or a couple weeks ago around Pender and how there's just community pride, and against all odds, the community's thriving. It's really, really a good story. Do you have ideal housing that's right for your family, and are you involved in your community? So the takeaways here, let's identify how we can contribute to our community, again, based on what your personal mission is. If you love kids and you love being around kids, everybody needs a T-ball coach. Go volunteer to do that, or volunteer at the church, work with the Sunday school class, or whatever it is based on your personal mission. If you love animals, get involved in the Humane Society, or get involved in some organization locally that taps into your mission where you can serve. And start small. Even if you only have an hour a month to go mentor a kid, say yes to that hour a month. And eventually, you'll probably build in more time in your schedule as that becomes more of a priority. And tell people about it. Tell them what you love doing and figure out ways to connect about that work. Go to the school and tell them what you do for a living and say, if you ever need any help, let me know. I'd love to help you out. So those are the 5, the community, social, physical, financial, and the one I forgot, purpose, career well-being are the 5 kind of broad elements of well-being. So maybe that sets the stage for the conversation today. You've got opportunities to learn about different things and invest in different parts of your learning today throughout the breakout sessions. We'll come back in here at the end of the day and do a little debrief and kind of think about where we're headed for the future. But thanks for your participation this morning. Thanks for for your raising your hands and sharing your ideas with each other. I think we're going into a break, Darren, but I'd be glad to answer any individual questions, and I'll be around some throughout the day. But appreciate your time and best wishes for a good day of learning today. Thank you.